What's up, Previews World, and welcome back to Comic Talk. I am your host, Troy Jeffrey Allen, and let's just get right to it. I'm going to introduce you to our guest this week. It is he's a teacher, he's a designer, he's an illustrator, he is a co-host of Cartoonist Kayfabe. Everybody say what's up to Jim Rugg. What's up, Jim?
Hey, Troy. How's it going, everybody?
Cool. Now, welcome back, man. This is the second time I've gotten to talk to you, and I think maybe the fourth time I've actually come across you in some way, shape, or form in life. So it's always nice to have you to talk to.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. You know, as we were warming up beforehand, I'm happy to come on and talk about my work, you know, so thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. I think I met you like years ago at the Small Press Expo.
Yes.
You know, I was just there as a fan, but like ultimately, like I had saw Aphrodisiac, picked it up. And you and I kind of talked about blaxploitation at length in front of at the Small Press Expo for like at least 15 minutes, and I always remember that. So yeah, it's always cool, very cool to talk to you, man.
That's great. Yeah, that was a fun touring time with Aphrodisiac. A lot of fun conversations. You know, you tend to tour these books for like a year, and that was a good year for it.
And I mean, truthfully, like, I mean, I'm starting to notice a pattern here with you a little bit, and we're going to get into this a little bit more with the some of the interview questions. But you definitely have like an exploitation kind of 70s kind of love thing going on here. I've noticed it a lot in like a lot of your work, not all of your work, but like it seems to be a reoccurring thing. Am I right to guess that?
Yeah, 100%. I was born in the late 70s, and so I wasn't going to see these movies whenever they were first time playing, but that's the stuff that went on to like cable whenever I was, 10 or something, or video stores, even like probably is the bigger place where I would find all of this stuff. And the video stores, I spent a lot of time in my youth, like just trying, just overwhelmed by all the VHS covers and stuff. And those covers were designed for that. They were designed to be on a wall and to grab your attention. And they did. I loved all the horror movies from that time period, all the like straight to video action movies. It seemed like that market exploded. And as a result, like a lot of those movies weren't very good, but they made up for it with that exploitation movie, cover poster kind of style where it was like, grab it, it's all sizzle and no steak. But the covers, a lot of great stuff on those covers. And, it just grabbed my attention because you would just see that cover and maybe read on the back, and my imagination would run wild with the possibilities of what could be in this movie,
Yeah, right.
They never quite lived up to it or delivered it, but they certainly left an impression on me. So, my stuff is definitely influenced by that kind of time period, the exploitation movies, the aesthetic that came out of that, and the excitement that all of that stuff promised. Didn't often deliver, but I mean, like that's where I would start from was the promise of that excitement, and that's definitely informs the stuff I'm making.
Well, I can tell you definitely what is going to deliver is Octobriana, and I say that for a number of reasons here. And full disclosure, I have not read the book yet, but I'm excited to read the book because I know you're going to get a lot more than a comic in a lot of ways, right? And typically, getting a comic would be more than enough for me, but you're also getting a little bit of history, political history, comic book history, and a bunch of other stuff. So let's talk a little bit about Octobriana. Like, I want to point out she's a Russian superhero heroine. She was created to embody the ideals of the Russian Revolution. She was self-published. The book was self-published in 1971, and her origin is kind of a 1,000-year-old blood of Vikings. She was reborn inside a radioactive volcano, but that's not the full story, though, right? I mean, there's way more to this.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. I'm so happy that you set it up that way, Troy. That's a really good build. That's kind of the story. And so this author put together a book that he said was based on these underground illegal publications out of the Soviet Union at the time. And they published the book. It's the height of the Cold War. So the West was interested in this idea of like, oh, there's dissidents in the Soviet Union, and they're into like superheroes, making that connection to say like the superheroes of the 60s, right? The Marvel Universe heyday, would be the influence on something like the Octobriana underground comics. The book turns out to be, it's a hoax. The author made this up. The character was, I think, Amazonia or something that he tried to sell to places like, Warren Publications, who was doing Vampirilla. Whenever that didn't work, he adjusted it into this political thing, wrote an entire book about this false history of this character, and then found a publisher for it. And it took off. It was on the front page of a London newspaper whenever it came out. There was a German edition. There was an American edition. So, you know, it found a certain audience. And then years later, Brian Talbot puts it in The Adventures of Luther Arkwright, puts Octobriana into his comics as a supporting character based on all this history and this lore, you know, like she's this mythological character. And since then, cartoonists have been, you know, using her ever since, because she's public domain as part of her, you know, description and origin. But that original book, like I describe it a lot as like a mockumentary. If you think of, you know, Christopher Guest movies like Best in Show, and, you know, it's kind of along those lines, especially now that we know it's not true, but the stories are fantastic. You know, that history is such a setup. I want it to be true. You know, I want this character to exist the way it's presented. And, you know, it's comics. Like, we get to do that. That gets to be the myth. And she's public domain. So, you know, I can't use Wonder Woman without DC's permission, but I can use Octobriana and have kind of a, you know, there's some similarity there, especially the origins of being sort of this Amazon warrior type character. And again, with the, you know, the superheroes at the time being an influence, she looks cool. So it all kind of works. And it's neat that, you know, creators like me can just have access to this character and add to her legend.
Absolutely. So actually, speaking of which, where does Jim Rugg come into play into the legend of Octobriana? How did you discover her?
I like weird comics. I'm always looking for weird comics. People that follow Cartoonist Kayfabe or follow me on Instagram know this. And so now and then, you know, people will publish a book and it'll be like the weirdest 50 weirdest comics of all time, or the weirdest superheroes, that kind of thing. And Paul Gravett had written a book of that sort. I can't remember the exact title, but it's, you know, it's strange comics, that kind of thing. And she's an entry. So that was the first time I heard of her. And then I started looking for the book. You know, it's listed in that. And so I tracked down a copy and fell in love with it. I think
it was called Weird Tales or Weird Comics or something like that.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, something like that. Something like that. I made a process zine about making Octobriana, and I have the book listed in there under the right title. So
all right, no problem. As long as you gave credit.
Secret. I'm blanking on the title at the moment. But that's what happened, and it just caught my attention. And I had made some blacklight posters in the past. In the process of making those, I thought you could make a comic book using this kind of process, and it would look amazing, because, you know, it's fluorescent ink. It's the bright. You think of comics as like, you know, all in color for a dime or whatever in this 4-color fantasy world.
All right.
You replace those 4 colors with fluorescent colors, and it just becomes like, you know, you have to wear sunglasses to look at this thing in the daylight. And so, you know, I had that idea from a technical standpoint of like, this would really make a unique, beautiful book. What's a story? And I'd been looking for a story for a couple years, something that grabbed my attention, but I also thought, you know, fit this kind of like fluorescent blacklight look. And rereading Octobriana in the Russian Underground, it just dawned on me like, this could be perfect, because it's this subversive character. And it's, you know, it could be set in the 70s. That's whenever that book was published. And that all kind of added up to me like blacklight posters. You know, I think of those as being the 70s and the head shops. Oh, yeah. And it's like, okay, set it in the 70s, use this colorful character. And I was kind of off and running at that point. You know, it just became then this superhero, you know, how exciting could I make the comic itself? So I have robot Stalin is in it. There are flying pterodactyls. You know, she's breaking somebody out of a Siberian labor camp. There are these underground parties that are happening, you know, so it's this whole world that basically is all in that original book. You know, the ideas that I use are all coming from that original Octobriana and the Russian Underground book. And, you know, really just trying to build on the character that was already there, but present it in this kind of underground, you know, head shop kind of presentation.
Yeah. Now you mentioned that you like, of course, the book is set in the 70s, and I want to clarify. The book is called Octobriana 1976. Yes. So why specifically 1976? So is there any particular reason for that, or?
It's bicentennial year, you know, so I was imagining like if the American underground cartoonists of the 70s got hold of Octobriana in the Russian underground, and to show solidarity, they made their version of an Octobriana comic book. That's kind of the premise I was working under. The 1976, you know, it was going to be set in the 70s sometime, and it just felt like the bicentennial made a lot of sense. I always think of the great Jack Kirby Marvel Treasury, you know, bicentennial battles. That's a good book in my house. So you know, that's where my mind was, is just the bicentennial would be the perfect time for this kind of a, you know, Russian Cold War superhero character.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And so you completed the comic a while ago. I think, at least I read that, right? Like, this is something, I guess, had you been working on it off and on for a long time, or?
I did it. I finished it in March of this year, and I have a timeline for it also in that process, Zine. And I realized, like, I finished it right about the time that the NBA shut down their season, you know, for COVID and the quarantine. And my plan was, I had 2 books come out late last year and early this year. I had The Plain Janes come out in January, this big 500-page young adult graphic novel, and Street Angel, Deadliest Girl Alive, the trade paperback collection of my Image Street Angel series, came out in November last year. So I had a bunch of comic book shows scheduled for this year, like maybe the busiest schedule for comic book shows I've ever had, in order to promote those 2 books. And the plan was, Ad House Books was going to publish Octobriana in 1976, and we were going to go to all the shows with it. We weren't going to announce it anywhere online. You would show up to, you know, meet me at a show, and there'd be this new book that you've never heard of, this very shiny, very bright book sitting on my table next to me.
It'll be a surprise drop, huh?
Exactly. And, you know, it's always a challenge to sell indie comic books. And so the thinking was, we'll do this through the summer, you know, the main comic book convention season, and then we'll go through Diamond and comic book stores in the fall. And there'll be a bunch of word of mouth about, like, people that have seen this, you know, out on the show tour, on a show circuit. And so, you know, it would build some awareness for comic shop owners, and for, you know, people that hadn't seen me at a show. It would be a chance to be like, hey, there's this new book, we've been hearing about it, or, you know, maybe seen pictures online, and now it's available in Diamond. So that was our original plan, until COVID shut everything down and all of these shows were canceled. And so, you know, you sort of make adjustments at that point. But yeah, it had been finished. And then it was just like, even the printer that we used, you know, they closed down for, I don't know, 6 weeks or something like that. So, you know, it really was put on hold, and we had to just kind of like everybody, you know, sort of roll with the circumstances.
Okay. All right, cool. So, oh, wait, here it goes. Felix Moonrock says, first of all, great name. I hope that is your birth name, but I suspect it probably wasn't. That's a great cover. Yes, it is. And actually, the artwork looks great inside too. Also, I got to give a shout out about this. I actually bothered you about this. The Demon Killer print, which was kind of like the influence for this, right? Yes. Like, if you get a chance, just look it up, and I don't know, print it out as a poster or something. It's just the coolest thing ever. Absolutely love it. And I saw another comment pop up on the bottom of the screen. What was this? Samuel David. Hello, everyone. I purchased this book at my LCS. Thank you. It was like nothing I have ever seen before. I love that. That is so awesome. I mean, it's an attention grabber. Like, you know, and I'm not just referring to the girls and guns image that usually gets my attention, but just in general. I mean, from the black light effect to everything else. And also, I thought it was really cool that the solicit says, and I was a little confused about this at first, so I had to read up on this, that a bunch of artists came together to create this book. But the secret is out now, right? You are the bunch of artists that came together.
I'm the only hands on the book is me until it gets to the printer. Right. On this one, you know, sometimes I do work with with writers and collaborators and stuff, but for this, it's all me. It's coloring, lettering, writing. Everything is my hand.
Right. And that was cool because, like, did you differentiate your style from, like, in different parts of the book, from story to story or section to section, or?
It's pretty much all, you know, it's pretty consistent style wise. Definitely looks like the hand, I think, of one artist. But I do tend to switch styles from story to story. And so for Octobriana, you know, the main part was making that blacklight effect look cool. So I have like collections of blacklight posters. There's a book that came out years ago, and it's all about blacklight posters. And when you look through it, you see, like, there's a lot of black ink. It's almost like its own color. And, you know, I think that's just part of the properties of that kind of, like, light effect. So I figured that stuff out early on, you know, and then that becomes the style. I mentioned Street Angel a minute ago. You know, if you were to look at, like, Street Angel, Deadliest Girl Alive, there'd be a huge difference style-wise between that book, which is much more kind of like bright, colorful, almost like a picture book illustration style, versus Octobriana, which is much more of this, like, graphic poster style and approach with big bold lines and things. So it's different than some of my other work, but I hope within the comic, it's, you know, it's pretty consistent throughout the comic. there's some dramatic shifts in terms of scenes, you know, like you had showed one scene where it's the Siberian prison scene, and that one has like much more negative space, and you see even white is used, which is kind of a little bit of a cheat for a blacklight comic. But you know, it creates a very different visual on the page to make clear like we're in a different location, you know, the setting has changed, moving on to the next scene. So there are some shifts like that throughout the book, but for the most part, I think the style is pretty consistent.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I think it's worth it to run to Spencer's because the malls are open right now. Get yourself a black light, right?
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
And then go buy Octobriana because it's totally worth the experience.
That's a really good reason to leave the house. Hit Spencer's in your local comic shop and you'll be in business.
So we talked a little bit about her being mythological, but like, are you approaching her as mythological? Are you trying to give her an origin, or are you trying to create this larger, you're trying to support this idea of this larger than life character?
Yeah, the way I handle that, like I said, it all fits within the book, you know, in the text and kind of what I learned about her just in prepping for it. And so it's all very consistent. The back cover of the comic is all kind of a collage of all the different text that explains who she is and where she comes from. Oh, okay. And one of the parts that I really like is that it is this group of dissidents that create these comics. And so that's acknowledged on the back cover. So, you know, if somebody picks this up and doesn't know who Octobriana is, you can come to this fresh. You know, that back cover will catch you up on what you need to know about both her and her origin. And then the inside part builds on that a little bit because I have the group, the resistance group is known as the PPP party that is responsible for making her comics in Russia. I have them throwing their party, you know, and they're playing rock and roll on like an old cassette tape kind of thing and stuff. And so I have them transition, you know, like whenever a problem comes up in the story and you need Octobriana to, you know, come and save the world, it goes from sort of like them at the party realizing we've got to do something to cutting to Octobriana, where, you know, as a reader, you might interpret that as they're making up the story, you know, like now they're doing what they can to give this character life. It's never explicitly spelled out, but I do think it sort of is, you know, her secret identity, if you will, is not like Clark Kent and Superman so much as it is this underground group of cartoonists that are making and telling her stories and then like dive into her story. So
you're completely approaching this as the propaganda was meant to be. That's really cool. I love that. That's super awesome. You mentioned Robot Stalin, right? Like, is he the main villain? Like, is there more to it than that, or what's going on with the Robot Stalin?
Troy, what could be two great words? How could there be a bigger villain than Robot Stalin? Yeah, he's the main bad guy. You know, he's sort of the Octobriana opposes the Soviet regime. And so Robot Stalin is definitely the top of that Soviet regime in this comic, for sure.
No, I love that. It's hard not to like just thoroughly enjoy the imagery. Like I only saw like some of the preview images for this, and off the bat I was like, yeah, this is for me. I know this is for me. Like, yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if you remember or if you ever read Mike Mignola's The Amazing Screw-On Head.
That is my favorite Mike Mignola story, which is sacrilege to some people.
Well, I loved it too. That was a big influence. That's been a big influence on everything I've done, but it's a big influence on Octobriana, where like my idea was, you know, a self-contained story that's very satisfying, but works in one comic book issue. You know, that was something I thought was really neat when Amazing Screw-On Head came out, because so many comics at that point were multi-part, you know, writing for the trade. So whenever I read this, you know, it was a very different experience as a reader, you know, something I wasn't getting normally from new comics, and it left an impression. It's also tongue-in-cheek and a little, you know, has a lot of cartoony elements that I thought worked really well and found entertaining. And, you know, a lot of my work contains that kind of tongue-in-cheek character designs or situations, settings, you know, moments. And Octobriana really pulls from that. You know, I mean, Robot Stalin, that's a cartoon character, you know. It makes for great fighting and action and stuff. But if you look at, you know, even like the old Marvel Universe stuff, I feel like that stuff is, you know, it's cartoons. Like it's these big, giant, fun characters and fights and moments. And so, you know, that's the stuff that I'm trying to channel with Octobriana, is those kinds of things, those pieces that I really enjoy from my own comics reading.
Now, actually, here's a question for you. Like, how did you pinpoint what interpretation of Octobriana you were gonna make your own? Like I've seen previous artwork, and like there are some similarities. There's also a lot of differences too. So how did you come about making Jim Rugg's version of Octobriana?
I wrote this story pretty quickly, like basically over a weekend. I wrote this story,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to kind of decide, like, do I want to spend 2 months making this, drawing it and everything, because it's a lot of time. Saying yes to something means saying no to a lot of other stuff. And so I sat down and I drew Octobriana several times, just kind of to see, like, do I like drawing this character, and also to figure out how would I draw her. And so, it's a lot of artists do this whenever they take over a book or a new character, or create a new character. You just hit your sketchbooks, and you do a bunch of drawings of the character, and you kind of find what works. You try variations, and you see what makes sense to you. You sort of, it's hard to explain, but it when you see it. And the key is do a bunch of sketching, give yourself that option to see it, to look at some variations and really kind of pick out and respond to the ones that are speaking to you. So, mainly I work from that original book that I keep saying, Octobriana and the Russian Underground. I think it's probably a 200-page book, so there's a lot of different art in that book, even though it's mostly text. And I kind of treated that as my main starting point. There are a lot of other Octobriana comics, and I have a handful, and I looked at several of them. There's a guy, John Short, that wrote a history of Octobriana that covers all of her publications, more or less. There's I think it's Norway, I want to say, a Norwegian short film of the character. So there are all these different versions of her. Billy Idol has her, tattooed on his arm. So there are all these different versions of Octobriana out there. I mainly started with that original text and did a bunch of drawings myself. And, I was aware of the other versions, but they don't stray too far either. If you were going to, again, take on a character like a Wonder Woman or something, it'd be the same approach of, like, you've seen a bunch of, different versions, do some sketching and kind of work out which version is yours. And, a lot of cartoonists, I think that's pretty standard.
All right, cool. Awesome. I love that. And you are also part of Cartoonist Kayfabe, right? And this is like your YouTube series. You do this with Ed Pisker. You guys do great interviews. It makes me jealous every single time you guys drop one. But also I'm riveted because I love the history of comics, right? And so you guys really tap into that in a very cool and unique way. And so first of all, thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, Troy.
But so enamored with Cartoonist Kayfabe I've been, so that I went ahead and joined the Cartoonist Kayfabe Facebook, right? Okay. And it really is an extension of, like, what I feel like you guys are trying to accomplish with Cartoonist Kayfabe. So I asked a couple of people in Cartoonist Kayfabe's Facebook page a few questions to shoot at you. So here we go. Let's toss some questions your way and see what's up. Anthony Max, first up, says, I'd like to know what his earliest influences were, his favorite titles as a youth. I know he covers it all the time on the show, but I bet he skipped some good ones. Did you skip some good ones?
I don't know, man. It might be a little broken record, but I'll run through a few. Frank Miller was like the first guy that I really went hard in trying to track down all his stuff. I got a copy of Ronin #1 at a flea market and just fell in love with it, because it's like, it was Japanese and European. I had never seen anything like it. It was really early on in my reading. It was before I had read Dark Knight or anything. And I was just like, who is this guy? I need more of his comics. So that was somebody I followed for a long time. And I think that I think I'm lucky for that. I think he has a lot of fundamental storytelling, especially from that 80s period. This would have been like late 80s when he was away. And, I went back through his Daredevils. I went through things like Batman Year One, Dark Knight Returns. And, it's very, very foundational in a lot of ways for me. From there, I went into all the Image guys, really, because that's when I was reading. And, Jim Lee was doing X-Men, and Liefeld was doing X-Force and New Mutants, and McFarlane was on Spider-Man. Those were really the stuff that I was super into. And then when Image formed, I followed those guys, kind of grew, bored of that pretty quickly, and make a jump into like alternative comics and indie comics. And so that would be everything from, say, Dan Clowes and 8-Ball, Chester Brown, Yummy Fur, Julie Doucette, Dirty Plot. Those were some that Chris Ware, Acme Novelty Library. Those were some that I kind of went through next, and maybe little bits and pieces here and there along the way. But those are some of the big ones. We just did a video on David Lapham's Stray Bullets, which would have been like the mid 90s. We were reading it whenever it first started. That was one of those indie comics, that if you imagine, I love Frank Miller. This is like Sin City's coming out, you know,
Yeah.
big in that. And then David Lapham, who I knew from Harbinger at Valiant and thought was really good. When he started doing Stray Bullets, man, that was like my favorite comic for a while. So that's a few of the names, you know.
Yeah.
You never stop looking. We mentioned Mike Mignola earlier. I mean, you know, certainly I think a lot of cartoonists go through big Mike Mignola fan time.
I've walked through SPX and like, yeah, there's a lot of Mike Mignola fans.
yeah. We talk about that sometimes on the show too, is he's so influential in that way. You know, so many young cartoonists show up and they're wearing that on their sleeves. And hey, you know, no problems there. I think that's pretty common that young cartoonists, you can see their influences, because in the beginning, there's maybe a few people that you're super into. But at this point, like, you know, I'm looking around my room, it's just full of books and I've taken stuff from virtually all of them. So now the influences are probably in the thousands or even, you know, maybe 10,000
awesome,
out there now.
Love it. What else we got, Johnny? What's going on here? Tony McMillan says, I'd love to hear him talk about what draws him to female characters. This is actually one of the patterns I was talking about with you as a creator. Is it not a choice as much as just a coincidence, or is there something to it? So what do you say?
It's definitely a choice, you know, and we can start with Street Angel was like my first published work and probably the first, you know, one of the first female characters I really focused on. Although I will say, maybe even going back a little bit further, when I was in high school, I had a pretty good relationship with my art teacher. You know, most of my teachers in general just dismissed comics as being, why are you wasting your time with this children's medium? But I had one art teacher that knew I was pretty serious and I was into this, and I would show her whatever I was doing. And at some point she commented that, like, I could not draw attractive women, you know, like everybody looked like Wolverine. Whenever you're starting out, you know, everything looks like Wolverine.
Right.
And so when you get criticized, then it becomes like this thing, like you can't see past it. And in my mind, it's like, I'm going to show her I can draw, you know, I can draw women. What are you talking about? I'll learn how to draw women. And so, you know, like maybe it was to show my art teacher that, hey, you know, I can do this too. But with Street Angel and probably a lot of my work since then, it's to be different, you know, like I want comics for everyone. And so it was really like with Street Angel specifically, I would go to the comic shop and I would look at the new comic shop, you know, the new comics wall that a lot of shops have where you could kind of see, you know, 100 books or something. And it just felt like it would be different, you know, like I wanted to do something that would be different on that wall. And Street Angel grew out of that, you know, take whatever I could identify as common and do the opposite of. And that's really, that was the origin of Street Angel. And, you know, from that point on, it just kind of, you know, I did Plain Jane's after Street Angel. And I think that was directly a result of the editor saw Street Angel and had that in her file. And, you know, I know that that's what led to Plain Jane's. And so one thing just kind of builds on another. But, you know, I've always wanted comics to be for everyone. And it certainly was a boys' club, you know, whenever I started out. And so, you know, doing female characters to me was like, this is great. You know, there's almost no competition for it. Like when Street Angel came out, there weren't a lot of comic, you know, superhero comics that featured a female lead. So it was a way to stand out and be different, you know, which is selling books is hard, man, you know, so you want to do something to stand out from the crowd, to distinguish yourself in some way. And that was one of the things that I started out with and has treated me pretty well. You know, like I said, that led to Plain Jane's, which I have come back to in recent years and had a really good experience with that book now for almost 15 years. So one thing leads to another. And Octobriana grew out of a blacklight poster that I made, which featured a woman barbarian that was very in the 70s. And so it kind of seemed natural that, you know, it would be a female lead because it was building on that poster concept.
Right. And I just want to reiterate that poster's awesome.
Thank you.
I hope you reprinted or something because the world needs to see it one more time. How does Jim feel about reprinted facsimile editions of classic stories? Okay, this is a loaded question, isn't it?
You know, I feel mixed. You know, sometimes I think people do it really well, and then I'm grateful that these things exist and they're affordable and you can find them. It often surprises me that they aren't done better, you know, in terms of presentation and quality. And I mean, mainly it's paper stock. When DC, I remember whenever they first started reprinting the Jack Kirby's Fourth World, and they put them out in like 4 hardcover volumes. It was on this uncoated paper, and it kind of felt like newsprint. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. There was a moment I think it was at San Diego, where like they were talking about it and they acknowledged that it was a mistake. and they were talking about this specific book, and the fans in the crowd cheered because of how great the book was. It was funny that it was a mistake that it turned out that way.
Right. Yeah.
So, I think like everything, there are great examples of it, and there are some that I don't agree with aesthetically, but I'm glad they exist. Whenever I started reading comics, you would hear about these stories, and there was no way I could afford them. It was just impossible. And so finding ways to reprint them, I think, is a good thing, because it's a lot of good work. And, if you're attached to a character, it's nice to be able to go back and read their history. So I'm mostly in favor of them. I wish they would maybe care for them a little bit more, or get somebody, I don't know, like a Chip Kidd or someone who's really into production to kind of oversee the reprints, because I don't know that it would cost that much more, to make a couple of these decisions that I think would flatter the artwork, and could kind of make that presentation a little stronger. But, I think also a lot of people don't care that much. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the double-edged sword of it, right? Like, the people who collect are going to care a lot about it, but at the same time, some of those reprintings are to get those stories in new readers' hands. So, yeah, I totally get that. I think we have one more viewer question. How does he keep ink from getting all over his nice white shirt? So there are a lot of pictures of you wearing a nice white shirt. So how do you do that? What is the magic behind this?
Well, I don't actually ink in the white shirt. I am, if you know me, I am pretty OCD. So if you ever see my original art or something, it kind of looks like that white shirt, where I'm pretty careful, and my inking's relatively precise, and that kind of reflects all of the process for me. So I'm trying to keep the pages clean, and metaphorically myself in that process. It's just the way I work. Sometimes you'll see originals. Some artists have these originals that are smeared with graphite, and they're kind of awesome to look at. But I just have this OCD of like, keep the page clean, as clean as possible, and so it kind of extends to the whole drawing area and what I'm doing.
There you go. So it's not black magic, guys. It's not a sleight of hand. It's just, he just wears a different shirt. So there you go.
That's the secret.
So we do this one last segment we do called Rapid Fire, which we ask you a bunch of very straightforward questions, and it's right off the top of your head. There are no gotcha questions. They're all fun questions. So let's give it a shot. Let's do Rapid Fire. All right, so we already talked a little bit about some of your favorite comics, but what was the first comic you read? Do you remember it all?
I do. It was Marvel Comics Presents number 26. Very random. I think I picked it up because I thought it was a Hulk comic. Marvel Comics Presents, has several short stories. Hulk was like the character I most was interested in, and Paul Galassi has a story in it called Cold Blood. It was like introduction of a new futuristic character. Very cool. But I loved it. And like, I was drawing all the time. I was a little bit older whenever I grabbed my first comic. I was probably 10 or 11, and I bought it at a drugstore. No comic shops whenever I started out near me. And so by the time I got home, I had seen like there was a penciler, an artist listed, and they looked kind of like what I drew. And at that point, I had fallen in love in the car ride from the drugstore back home, looking at this comic. And from that day forward, pretty much I was determined to be a comic book artist, and just kept buying comics ever since.
Yeah, I mean, that's whatever the gateway drug is, right? It just, if it works, it works. What is there a favorite character you like to draw? Like if Jim's just bored around the house and he wants to draw something, is there one that he just defaults to all the time?
Probably Street Angel. That's the one that I end up doing sketches for, like when people buy books or whatever. So inadvertently, that's the one that I can, close my eyes and draw.
Okay. Favorite villain, and then favorite hero. Not superhero necessarily, but favorite hero.
Man, favorite villain's a good one. I don't know if I even have a favorite villain. That makes me feel terrible. Like all my favorite villains are wrestling heels.
I mean, what is it? Like, let's hear it. Who do you have?
Right? I mean, you got to start with Ric Flair, Roddy Piper. I'm a big Roddy Piper fan, and he may have ended up a babyface, but certainly was known as being a heel.
One of the greatest.
Start with those two, I think, is probably a good start. Favorite heroes, I love the Hulk. Hulk's probably my number one favorite of like the Marvel DC pantheon. I identified, as a kid, I often lost my temper, so it was very easy to identify with the Hulk. And monsters are the coolest thing ever. I love monsters, I think, my whole life. So I'm going to say the Hulk for a hero by a long shot. Maybe
Okay.
Ghost Rider racing in behind him in second place.
All right, there you go. Still kind of in the monster category.
Oh
So yeah,
yeah,
why
for
not?
sure.
Is there like that? Is there like one comic in your collection that like, that like just has traveled from house to house with you, just never going to give it up, never going to like, even let a friend borrow it because you're like, no, this means too much to me. Is there one of those?
There really isn't,
Uh,
but there probably should be. Whenever I was in high school, I lent a friend The Crow, James O'Barr's The
mm,
Crow, and
mhm.
never got it back. So I'm always a little reluctant to lend out comics to anyone.
I mean, I feel like a good friend wouldn't ask to borrow your comics. Like, you know what I mean? It's not like I was going to say it's not like a video game, but a good friend wouldn't ask to borrow a video game either. So, what else we have? Okay, we're talking about Octobriana, right? It is Russian Revolution propaganda. So, top 3 dictators, go.
Jeez. Oh man, I don't know. I thought there were no top 3 dictators. I'm gonna hard pass on this one.
Okay,
I think you
all
can't
right.
win by calling out your favorite dictators. Now
I was gonna say like, yeah, now's probably not the time to do that. So you pass with flying colors, Jim. The internet's not gonna come after you. It's okay.
That's the best secret gotcha question you could have. Well, gotta put Hitler on that list, right? It's
somewhere,
like,
right? Yeah, right. Like, yeah. I mean, in all fairness, like the question was like top 3. It could have been top 3 worst. Not necessarily top 3 best.
right.
But I'll let you off the hook for that one. Sure, why not? So, what's next for Jim Rugg? I mean, you said you were going to go on a big tour for this year, but that's kind of on the back burner now. So, what's next for you?
I'll be honest, I'm not sure. I cleaned up my studio recently, and that meant organizing art and things like that. And I had a couple of graphic novels in different stages of development that have been affected by COVID. One was put on hold. One I had put on hold to start the other one. So I have these projects that are in different levels of completion, but I don't really know what's going to be next for me. That's kind of where I'm at right now, is answering that question. And actually, hopefully I'll have something in mind soon. I have some art projects that I've been doing, one that should be announced next week. But in terms of what the next big comics project is, I am searching for that right now.
Okay. No, I mean, hey, now's a good time to just kind of do a little bit of creative searching, see what's in the holster or whatever, So I totally love that and respect that. So I guess that's kind of it for us. But I want to remind people, you said you're going to have like an art project that's going to be popping up next week.
Yeah, I'm very excited for it. It is with some licensed characters, characters that I don't think I've done anything with commercially. So yeah, I'm looking forward to announcing that one, and it'll be here before we know it. So
definitely keep an eye on Jim's social media for sure, and keep an eye on that announcement. And also just in general, like, he said he doesn't have anything like necessarily like on the horizon right now, but you can definitely check out Street Angel. There are multiple versions available from Image Comics right now. And actually go ahead and check out Gemini's interview where we talk about Street Angel at length, because that's actually another fun one. And that's it, guys. I hope you got a little comic history, a little world history. Hopefully you discovered something interesting, and keep on discovering by getting Octobriana at your local comic shop. I want to say thank you to Jim Rugg for coming out and hanging with us for a little bit.
Yeah, thanks again, PREVIEWSworld and Troy, for having me, man. This is I do love talking about my comics, so thank you very much.
Absolutely, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you at SPX in the future for sure.
That'll be a good day.
It will. And that's it for Comic Talk this week, guys. I've been your host, Troy Jeffrey Allen, and I will see you at the spinner rack. I'll catch you later.